Hello everyone, and welcome to the June 2019 update of the Power BI desktop. As always, we have lots of exciting features this month, and we're going to start with the reporting features. The first feature is that we've updated our panes and some of the other UI to make it much more modern, and also make it align more with Office. So you'll notice that it's going to be a lighter shade than the blacks and the grays we had before. So looking at Power BI Desktop, you can see that the visualization pane and the fields pane is now a light shade of gray with black text and white boxes. You'll see that we've updated some of our icons as well. So like you can see here, this table now has this like bright yellow checkbox. We've also updated the view switcher on the left here as well. And the icons have been updated for this as well. So this is really the first step in a broader change we're working on of modernizing our UI and also trying to make it feel more like an Office product, because we know a lot of people are already familiar and comfortable with where things are located and how things work in Office. So if we can align closer to that, it would be even easier for new people to get started with the product. So we started with our panes and a couple of other places of the UI, and going forward, eventually we're also going to update the ribbon to make it look more like the Office ribbon. We're also going to eventually introduce a dark mode as well. That's going to align very much to similar to Office, where you get a light mode by default, but through the options you can switch over to a dark mode. That's like a true dark mode. So we will be working on all of these things as well in an attempt to modernize the product and make it easier to use. This month, we've also added visual level filters to slicers, which was a top ask on our UserVoice site, ideas.powerbi.com. It's been up there for quite a while, and we're excited that we can finally address it. So if I add a normal slicer to my report and just resize it to make it fit where I want it to, and I just add in, say, category to the slicer. Originally, you could not actually filter this list down through the visual level slicers, but now you can. You can, just filter it down using the normal list. You can also do things like switch over to top in and do a top, let's say top 5 based off of sales amount. I can add that in and apply that filter. And now the slicer only shows the top 5. And I can even do things like add a measure filter as well, and filter based off of that. This feature works exactly like any other visual level filter, so it's going to be just like any other visual, so that it's not going, it's what you expect, but also one thing to note is that if you set a filter in the visual level filter section, it does not carry forward whenever you cross highlight or cross filter. So if you set, say, a measure filter on the slicer, when you then click on something from the list to filter the rest of your report, that measure filter is not going to carry forward. And this is consistent with how it works for all of our other visuals as well. Our third feature is a follow-up for our performance analyzer pane that we shipped last month. A lot of people who tried out that pane were very excited, but they all had a very similar small request, which was being able to sort the pane as well. So if I go over to the View tab, open up my performance pane, and start recording. And let's just refresh all of my visuals so I have some stuff in here. You'll now see that there's a sort direction UI next to duration, and I can now click on that to change it from ascending to descending. And I can also choose through sort by to switch from the action order, which is default, to the total time it took, or specifically how much time did it take for the query or for the visual display. So if you're focusing just on DAX improvements you can do, for example, you could sort by the DAX query order and actually figure out what are some ways you can improve the DEX calculations. If you're connected to a direct query source, that the time it took for a direct query would also be an option in the sort by drop-down as well. Next on our list is some formatting options that now have support for conditional formatting. So if you remember, a couple of months back, we shipped the ability to conditionally format your titles and your URLs for actions so that you could have dynamic URLs for users to click on and also dynamic titles that update based off of cross-filtering, filters, slicers, things like that. This month, we're extending that feature to work with some of our color properties that have been asked for quite a bit within our community. So the first one I'm going to focus on is the background color. So now, and this feature is going to work for all visuals that have a background. Whenever your background is on, you'll see that you now have this little ... for conditional formatting that you can pop open and either set color scales, rules, or field values for the background color. It works just like it did for conditional formatting of cells in a matrix. And I've already set up some rules for this multi-row card. And you can see when I had the rule set up, the color swatch is replaced with an FX. And when you click on it, it opens up. And I set up the rule so that if something had less than 4,000 and its average sales, this background color would show red because that's really urgent. We need to focus on that group. So if I pick music, movies, and audio, you'll see that is, in fact, less than 4,000 in sales. And so the color is now red, just like I said. If you ever want to turn that off, you can either, of course, go click on the ... and choose revert to default. You could also right-click directly on that option and choose to revert to default as well, in addition to actually being able to just revert to default the whole card. This also applies to titles, in that you can now conditionally format the font color and background color of the title bar as well, and it works just like it did for background color. You'll also note for cards and gauges, we've also added conditional formatting as well. So for the gauge, I set the filled data color to be conditionally formatted. And you'll see for this one, I left the rule as color scales. So it's going to go from a gradient of red to green as the value for units increases or decreases. And for the card, you can now do both the color for the data label and the color for the category label, and I've set up the rules the same for both of those. And so as I click through the various options here, you can see that the color turned to yellow and the gauge color changes. And as I get to some that are higher, you can see here, the gauge filled and it's green and the values of the units are green. So you can set up rules so that all of these colors are completely dynamic. And this can make it a lot easier for your users to understand when something's going well or not if you're using any of these visuals. And just like a couple months ago when we released the title updates, I want to remind you that this is not the end of this feature. We do have plans to continue expanding it to more and more options in the formatting pane. Fifth on our list is a feature that actually came out of a hackathon somewhat recently on our team, and that's a visual header tooltip. We've been seeing that a lot of people like to add helpful information to their reports, and we definitely want to encourage that. This kind of information can help you end users actually understand what are some of the definitions of the metrics and an explanation of how the calculation is done for metrics they're seeing. You could be explaining how to interact with the report, suggestions on, say, hey, right-click to drill through, things like this. People like to add these helpful hints. And to do this before, they were either having to clutter up their report with text boxes, or they were setting up complex logic with bookmarks to show and hide a bunch of layers to show this helpful information. With the visual header tooltip, you can actually just add a little icon to the header of your visual, and when people float over it, they'll be able to see all this information that you're providing them. So I've already set it up for this key influencers visual. You can see there's a question mark icon on this visual, but if you look at any of the other headers, there is no icon. And when I hover over that icon, you'll see that there's a tooltip that flies out with some text that I have custom set to just remind users that they can actually click on these bubbles to open an explanation visual. And the way I set that up was through the formatting pane. In the visual header bucket, you'll see at the very bottom of all of these different toggles, there's a new toggle that's the visual header tooltip icon. And it's off by default, and in this case, because this is a new icon we're adding, when it's off, it actually is off in the header as well in the editing mode, unlike most of the other toggles. And when you turn it on, the icon shows up. And at the same time, you'll see a new card is now going to be accessible to you when that icon is on, called the Visual Header Tooltip card. And in here is where you can type in whatever text you want to show, and also set things like the color, the text size, the font family, the background of the tooltip, how transparent it is, all the same things you can control now on our normal tooltips as well. And you can also decide, instead of showing just text that you typed, you can also choose to show a tooltip report page as well. So if there's something really complex that you need to show in your tooltip, like, images or some kind of visual that explains something or anything complex, you can choose to build a report page tooltip, and whenever a person hovers over that icon, the report page tooltip will also load and show. In this case, this tooltip's not particularly helpful for that, so I'm going to set it back to none so that I get my tooltip text. So hopefully you can start using these visual header tooltips to help explain aspects of your report to your end users and just make their experience a lot easier and better. Next up is a feature we added based off of some requests that we saw from our community on Twitter. It's been an idea that we've always had on our backlog to do. It's a small feature of letting you customize the label for totals in your table and matrix. But it's always been really hard to get it to the top of the backlog to do. And there was a lot of conversations on Twitter. A lot of people were getting excited about this idea and really wanting us to do it. And so someone on our team, an engineer, saw that excitement, and he decided on his own to go and do this feature on his spare time because he knows the table and matrix code well, and he knew that it would be something quick and easy for him to do on the side. And so we got an extra feature thanks to, Rami doing something on the side. And now you can go into your matrix or your table and customize what is shown here instead of total. So if I go over to the subtotals card, you'll see that now there's an option for the row subtotals label and the column subtotals label. And you can type whatever you want in here. And once you do, it now shows up on that label. And of course I can do the same thing for the column subtotals. And if my matrix was not in the stepped layout, let me turn that off real quick. You'll see that we have more total labels in this non-stepped layout version. And by default, they're going to take the same label as what the grand total has. But you can go in and customize that. You'll see at the bottom of this card, when you're in this layout, you have a per row level and per column level option. And when you turn that on, you'll be able to customize for both country and class what the label specifically shows. And if you had a hierarchy in the columns as well, this applies as well. And like I said earlier, you can customize this label for your tables as well. Next on our list is that our sync slicer pane now supports hierarchy slicers as well. So the hierarchy slicer is one of the most popular visuals from the marketplace. A lot of people love that they can show a hierarchy in the slicer. And up until now, there has been a limitation where you couldn't use the slicer and also use our sync slicer pane. But now, whenever I click on the sync slicer, you'll be able to see that the sync slicer pane works. It recognizes as a slicer that it can sync, and it's going to work just like all of the other built-in slicer. So I'm going to choose to add this slicer to page 1 and also make it visible so you can see that it happened. And if I jump over to page 1, you now see the slicer and it's synced. So if I switch over to cameras and camcorders and then switch back to my page, you'll see that it is synced here as well. So one limitation of this, just so you're aware, is that for the hierarchy slicer to sync, you will need to be using the same fields in the same order whenever you're configuring it in the field well. These will need to be the same for the syncing to actually work. Theoretically now, other slicer custom visuals can take advantage of sync slicers as well. They just need to make sure that they've set, as the author of the custom visual, they'll need to make sure that they've set the right capability in the visual for us to know that it supports syncing the slicer. Last on our list is consistent font sizes across visuals. And what I mean by this is that if you've been building reports for quite a while, you've likely noticed that sometimes if you had put 8, the number 8, in our font size bucket that we have, that could have meant something different depending on where in the UI you are adjusting the font size. And so you could put 8 everywhere across the visual, and then there'd be some places that are bigger and some places that are smaller. The reason this was different was that some places in our formatting pane were using points, and some places were using pixels. And 8 points versus 8 pixels, they're different sizes, and so they looked different. So what we've done, because that was not very clear and not very consistent, we have updated our formatting pane to use points everywhere for the visuals. This means that anytime you now put 8 anywhere in the pane, the visual will look the same consistently across it. Something else we've done is that we've updated the formatting pane so that there's now a little PT next to the text size, so that you actually know that you're using points instead of pixels within the visual, so it's even clearer than it was before what size you're actually setting. There are a few places within the product that are still using pixels, particularly the filter pane and the text box. We are working on getting those switched over to points in a future release as well. We have 2 updates for our analytics section this month, the first of which is a bunch of updates to our key influencers visual. The first is that we've added support for live connected reports to Power BI datasets. So if you create a new report and live connect to a dataset that exists in the Power BI service, the visual should now be enabled and work just like it does for imported models. It should work no differently than any of our other visuals in live connect mode. We've also added support for testing cloud RLS roles for the key influencers visual. So if you're using RLS for your report and you are also using the key influencers visual, you'll be able to see through testing the roles the types of insights your consumers will get when viewing the report with all the proper security applied. So normally when viewing the visual in your report, of course, the insights you're getting are across the entire data set that you have permission to, but whenever people are viewing with the RLS, they have access to less data. So the insights they're going to get are going to be different because it's based off of different data. So with this now new support, you can go and test that and actually see what the experience is going to be like. Lastly, we've improved the accessibility of the key influencers visual as well. So if my focus is on the key influencers visual, I can hit Control right arrow key to move my focus into the visual, just like I can any of the other visuals, and I can start tabbing to the different components of the visual. And whenever my focus is on one of the bubbles of each of the influencers, I can hit the Enter or Space key to open the drill visual. And when I do that, my focus moves into that visual, and then I can tab around that visual just like I could any other visual on the canvas, and then hit Escape to close my focus on that, close that visual, and move my focus back to the visual as a whole. And of course, if you're using a screen reader, that will also read off any of the important information related to what's in focus. And we've added high contrast support as well. So if you have high contrast on for your computer, you'll be able to see all of those high contrast theme colors applied to the key influencers visual. Speaking of accessibility, our second feature under Analytics is accessibility improvements for the Manage Aggregations dialog as well. So if I open up the Manage Aggregations option for one of my tables, you'll see that my focus is by default on one of the drop-downs, and I can tab between each of the different components, and if I want to say set something, I could use the drop-downs to set each of those things, delete things, whatever I need to do to set up my aggregations. And so if you were using this preview feature, you can now use it with a keyboard, screen reader, and high contrast settings.
This month in our modeling section, we've added a new DAX comparison operator. To show you when to use this new comparison operator, let's take a look at the sample dataset. In this dataset, I have a column called discount, which indicates the percentage discount for a certain product. You'll notice that this dataset does have blank values and it also has 0. There are some cases where you want the blanks to be counted as zeros, where there are other cases where blank just means that the data is unknown, whether there was a discount or there wasn't a discount. So now let's take a look at the DAX statement. So if you have the scenario where you want to distinguish between blanks and zeros, that's when you're going to use the new operator, which is the double equals, to compare. And then when you have the scenario where blanks are 0, so that's when you just continue using the old operator, which is the single equal sign. So as you see here, if I filter this to blank, using the new operator, I can now distinguish between blanks and zeros, versus the old one will just automatically consider blanks as 0. Moving on to our visualization section, the first on our list is Personalized Visualizations pane, which is a new preview feature. Let's take a look. With this preview feature, you can now pin any marketplace custom visual into your visualizations pane so that it's really easy to come back to and you never have to keep going in and adding a custom visual that you tend to use a lot. So what you do is, let's say if this is a custom visual that you're interested in, you can click Pin to Visualization pane, and now every time you open Power BI Desktop, you'll always see it there as part of your default visuals. The next item on our list is a custom visual that brings SCADA-like capabilities into Power BI. Let's take a look at the sample report. In the report, you'll see that we have 2 custom SVG panels, the one on the left and the one on the right. So a prereq for using this custom visual is you'll need to first create your own custom SVG panels, and you can do that in the Synoptic editor, which you can download from the Microsoft Store. But once you have created those SVG panels, let me show you how you can add them to your Power BI reports. So let's click New Page, and then select your custom visual here. And in the category data, as an example, we can use field tag and value as our measure. So you can either load the file in from your local, or if you've uploaded the file to a URL, you can paste the URL in the formatting pane. So under SVG source, let's paste in the URL. And now we have the custom panel visual in our report, which we can then add slicers to the page and cross-filter the data. So let's say if we want to filter by hour, we can go and do that. Next on our list is a custom visual that can be used for process mining scenarios. With this custom visual, you can take your event data and visualize it as a flowchart to better help identify bottlenecks and discover root causes. Let's take a look at the sample report. Here in our report, you'll see that the events that I'm looking at deal with product purchasing. So I have events such as view products, select items, add item to cart, and etc. You'll notice that the threshold is all the way to the left, which means that the complexity is at its minimum. So as we start moving the threshold, you'll see that I'm starting to add more events to the process. And I can also zoom in closer if I want to look at other events such as choose shipment term, choose payment term, submit order. So for further details, I can drag the threshold bar more to the right, which is going to increase my complexity by adding in more details and more detailed events. So now let's see how we would go and create this. So first, there's a couple of requirements. Your data needs to be structured in a certain way to be able to build this custom visual. You're going to need a unique case ID, ones that identify each case. You're going to need an event or activity name. So these could be things like checking out the order, logging out, logging in, viewing products. And then finally, you're going to need a timestamp. Once your data is in this format, getting started is pretty easy. All you need to do is drag into the field wells. So let's go back to the original. So in this case, you just drag in case ID as the case identifier, activity name as the event label. You have an optional order by, but you will need a timestamp. So it's as simple as that to set up. All you just need to make sure is that your event is in the right format. The last custom visual on our list is the DualCard visual. This visual is very similar to the existing card visual, except it allows you to compare two measures, not just one, all in a single visual. Let's take a look at the sample report and we can see how to create this visual along with great formatting options. Here on this page, I have a very basic example of what a DualCard is. You'll see that in this single visual, I'm able to display two measures, and this allows me to easily manipulate both at the same time, either that be formatting or even just position on the canvas. So it's easier to work with one single visual than having to align and adjust two separate card visuals. There's also a ton of formatting options, so let's take a look at those. So you can change the orientation of the card, whether you want that to be vertical or horizontal. There's also category formatting options. This includes conditional formatting for the category or changing the alignment or the position of the category or even the font of the category. You also have fill effects where you can change the background of the card, and the effects include changing whether it be from a solid to a blur, or also changing colors. And the last thing here is you can format the label how you'd like as well. So you can change you can change the conditional formatting, the alignment, position, and then also the font. Moving on to our next section, data connectivity. First on our list is shared and certified datasets. This feature is a game-changing feature because it allows you to use a single dataset across multiple reports and even across workspaces. Let's take a look at this feature in action. To get to this new feature, what you'll need to do is click Get Data and then select Power BI Datasets. Then you'll get this dialog which shows all the datasets within your organization. It tells you the name of the dataset along with the endorsement, so whether it's been certified by someone in your org. It'll tell you the owner, so if you need to contact them, in which workspace they lie in, and then also when the dataset was last refreshed. There's also a search box available where if you're looking for a specific data set, you can search there. So let's go ahead and connect to one of these data sets. And there you see it has populated all the data to the right. Next on our list is the Common Data Service connector, which is now generally available. So this connector is very useful if you're a user across the Power Platform. You'll find this connector under the Online Services category within the Get Data dialog. One more connector releasing this month, which is the Azure Data Explorer connector. This connector is now generally available and can be found also in the Get Data dialog. We've also made a lot of enhancements to the Cosmos DB connector, which includes query folding support to help boost performance by utilizing server-side resources, resource token support, and general performance reliability to help handle Cosmos DB throttles. Last in this section, we have the Entersoft Business Suite connector, which allows you to choose from either the pre-packaged, ready-to-use datasets, or you can build a custom-made dataset and connect to that in Power BI. One last update this month is we've added improvements to M Intellisense. We've added parameter hint support in the formula bar and also added hover support, so you can hover over various identifiers and display its definition. We hope you enjoyed these updates, and we'd love to hear your feedback on what were your favorite updates, as well as what you'd like to see in the future.